Hi everyone, it's time for a very special episode of for Adams for the Love of Movie Picks. This time around, we're going to be doing a top 40 greatest videos of all time video. This here is basically just kind of my own personal picks, my own personal opinion. This isn't in any way a professional posting of top 40 videos. In no way saying that these are the greatest 40 videos ever made. This is just my personal recommendation of the greatest 40 videos ever made. Again, and this is, and just so you know, for anybody who's thinking about doing this, this is not an easy thing to do. This originally started out as the top 25 videos, and I can only narrow it down to the top 40. To give you some perspective how hard that is, and I'm not bragging in any way, just to make you understand, I got about 1,200 movies in my collection right now. In my lifetime, I've been watching movies since I was about 5 years old. I've probably seen close to 10,000 videos in my lifetime. So I'm picking it basically solely out of what's here in my collection now. So I do apologize if there's any videos that I may have left off that you think belong in the top 40 or you think are part of a top 40. Feel free to leave a comment if you think there's a video I left out. If we get enough of them, I might do another video where we just, do the recommended top 40 as by you guys. And basically, again, this is just solely me picking out movies. We'll see if you agree with me. And without any further ado, we're going to get started. So basically, the first movie that I'm going to show you out of this collection. Oh, one last thing. These are in no particular order, these videos, folks. So I don't have a number 1. I don't have a number 40. Like I said, I had enough time just picking out the 40 videos. Never mind just actually trying to, sort them in any kind of an order. So without further ado, the first one on the list is the 2006 film World Trade Center, starring Nicolas Cage and Michael Pena, and is directed by Oliver Stone, the legend himself. So basically, this movie, it's based off of obviously the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Like I said, it came out in 2006, about 5 years after. But it focuses a little bit on it. It's more about the personal stories of these two Port Authority cops that are trapped in the rubble on the day of the attack. Also, their life, them as cops, and their personal lives with their families, and just really great story, very emotional, very powerful. The score to this, like just the music for the scenes, not necessarily songs, is very good too. So great movie. Next up on the list, now I've done a video on this one, and again, this might be a little bit of personal bias, but the Transformers the movie from 1986. As I've touched on, and the main reasons why I think this, just to sum it up, even as an animated film, it was standalone from the series. It got a very serious tone to it. You had characters dying. You had a swear word. Just a more serious nature to the movie, and of course, you can never go wrong with the classic '80s songs in this, rock songs, just '80s songs in general. One of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time, and one of my favorite films of all time. Next up on the list is the 2016 film Moana, Disney. One of the few animated films on my list. This one here I picked just because, in the long story tradition of Disney, it's especially as time goes on, Disney is going to have a harder and harder time picking up original stories for their movies. And, considering all they've done, it was quite unique to see a movie in 2016 have an original storyline that works so well. You got, I forget the name of the girl that plays Moana, but she does a great job. But of course, you got Dwayne the Rock Johnson as the demigod Maui, and just does a phenomenal job. Very funny character, great storyline, and the music is really well done. Again, I don't know if they're original traditional songs, or if they are, just made for this movie, but still great music. I love the songs in this movie. So Moana. Next up is the 1999 film The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. And also has Arnold Vosloo as the bad guy, the Mummy, or Imhotep is his actual name. The reason I picked The Mummy for this list is it is, even though it's set in made in 1999, it has the classic feel of the movies of old, like an older movie with a modern twist. It's just a really cool storyline. It's very different from the 1930s Mummy movie starring Boris Karloff. but it has its own unique storyline. It just has that classic feel to it, but it's really well done. Great storyline, great special effects. Definitely a recommendation on my end. Next up is the 1994 Disney hit film, The Lion King. So this movie is one of the, in my opinion, greatest Disney movies of all time. Loosely based around this Shakespearean play Hamlet. You basically got the uncle who wants to ascend to power on the throne, become king. In order to do it, he kills off the current king. He tries to kill off the prince, but fails to do so. Prince comes back, saves the kingdom, but it's done with a less violent way, more family friendly. And of course, great CGI, great animation. You got classic music, Circle of Life, Hakuna Matata. And of course, you got Timon and Pumbaa, hilarious combination. And the voice acting in this is superb. So definitely recommend The Lion King in that list. Next up, we've got all three in here, but it's really the first one of the Back to the trilogy, Back to the Future trilogy. I'm sorry, from 1985, Back to the Future Part 1. That I'm going to talk about. Just a game changer when it came out. It was a unique storyline. A guy invents a time traveling DeLorean, and his lab partner ends up going back in time with it, and creates all kind of havoc. And it's about him going back and fixing everything that he broke. You got Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, and Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown. So some great acting in it, great storyline, just a phenomenal movie. Definitely recommend Back to the Future on that list. Next up, I've done a video on this one before, but it's in the top 5 greatest movies of all time for sure. The 1994 film Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks. Again, it's just such a relatable film. It's about it's about as close as you can get to one of the most perfect films of all time. Just everything about this is spot on. Effects, storyline, acting. It's just a relatable movie. It's got great humor. A very genuine movie, so Forrest Gump for sure. Next up is another one that I've done a video on before, but I want to bring it up again. The 2004 film Ladder 49, starring Joaquin Phoenix and John Travolta. Just a great overall film. Very genuine, very relatable, good special effects and action sequences with the firefighter, but a lot of humility with the family scenes. So yeah, Ladder 49 definitely needs to be on that list. And pardon me, I'm just going to adjust the phone here. Getting a little bit of background lighting. See if we can fix that. Reflecting off the cases. Next up is the 2014 film John Wick, starring Keanu Reeves. Now this one here is really an action flick, and you'd be wondering why a movie that's strictly an action flick would be on this list. The reason why, and the case is Keanu Reeves' best film since The Matrix. The reason why I picked this film is just because you think of all whenever they started doing true action films outside of westerns, whatever it was, 1960s, 1970s, the long storyline of action films. This one here coming out in 2014, only 7 years ago, really was a game changer. Just the fight scenes, the gun scenes. And of course, Keanu Reeves just makes the character John Wick. It was just, when I watched this for the first time, my jaw hit the floor. It's just how phenomenal what I was watching is unlike anything I'd ever seen in an action flick before. Just a phenomenal movie. And while we're on the topic of Keanu Reeves, we'll talk about one of his other well-known hit films, the 1999 hit film, The Matrix. Starring Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus. You got Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity. And, of course, who could forget Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith. Another movie that when it came out, it was just a game changer. Nothing like it had ever come out before. The premise of that, most of the movie is taking place in a machine computer-generated world where the laws of the real world don't apply. So some of the action sequence and special effects that they did in this movie are obviously you can never get away with in the real world, but because they're in this fake world, they can do some things that you couldn't do in real life. So it was really unique and just a great storyline and a great film. Next up, another one that's a bit of a personal bias, but a favorite of mine, the 1991 film Backdraft. You got Kurt Russell and William Baldwin as the two title character firefighting brothers, literal brothers. Scott Glenn, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Rebecca De Mornay, Donald Sutherland, and Robert De Niro. And you've also got Ron Howard directing. just in 1991, the CGI was still kind of in its infancy, and they could have done with some of that, but they went with practical effects for this movie, and I think it really works a lot better for sure. Just a great action sequences with the firefighting. The story of the two brothers as firefighters. You also got the family dynamic of being in a firefighting family, and just the plot, the mysterious plot twist that they add to this. The plot line behind the movie is also really well done. Next up is a bit of a cliche one, but I think everybody would probably put this in their top 40, if not their top 10 list. The 1997 film Titanic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, and you've got James Cameron directing. But it's based on the true life story of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, and they've thrown in the love story between Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet's characters Jack and Rose, just to give it a bit of a Hollywood story, so it's not just about a ship sinking. But for me, what really made this movie great is the attention to detail about how they took photos that they've seen of the real ship and plans of the real ship, and the sets that they made and the models. Just phenomenal attention to detail. You really felt like you were on the Titanic in 1912. And of course, they use shots of the real Titanic on the ocean floor for some of the beginning sequences of the movie. Just a great overall big budget blockbuster. Definitely recommend the Titanic. Next up is the night. So on here I've got all three movies of the Ninja Turtles, but I want to talk about number one from 1990. Again, maybe a little bit of personal bias, but I love this film. It's one of the first live action Ninja Turtles film, and just it's coming out of the 80s, going into the 90s. In New York, just classic. I think that's what kind of lends itself to the movie is the time era, of the movie itself. 1990 New York, just a unique setting. The storyline is well done. Great humor in this, great action sequences. Just a great overall film, one of the staples from my childhood. I love that movie. Pardon me, folks, while I get a drink. Next up, we're going to do the 1984 film, Ghostbusters. Now, it says Ghostbusters 1 and 2, but we're just going to talk about number 1. So, basically, Ghostbusters was another game-changing film, and it was a storyline that, when you really think about it, shouldn't have worked, but it did. I think what they did is, instead of just taking it from a goofy standpoint of a bunch of guys trying to catch ghosts, they took it from a scientific standpoint. Some actual scientists studying the paranormal, looking for a scientific way to capture and study spirits. I think it made it a little bit more relatable and a little bit more realistic. Also, you've got the legendary actors Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, the late Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, Rick Moranis, Sigourney Weaver, and Ernie Hudson. It was a great storyline. It was game changing. There wasn't anything like it that has ever come before or really since. And just a phenomenal movie. Next up is another one that I've talked about before, but again, the 2017 film, The Greatest Showman. Just to sum it up, like I said, what really makes this movie work for me is the music. I mean, the acting is great, the main actors, the secondary actors, but the music for me is what makes this movie. Just phenomenal song choice, original song choice, or whatever they did for this movie. Just a great film. You want to watch it over and over again, and that's why I think it's just a great choice. Definitely great pick for the top 40. Next up, again, another one where it's got 1, 2, and 3, The Karate Kid, but I'm going to be talking about the number 1 from 1984, Karate Kid. Just a very relatable storyline. I think that everybody can say at some point in their life they've either personally experienced or know someone who has experienced bullying of some form. In this day and age, it's cyberbullying. Of course, back then it was the more personal approach. But in this movie, the kid who's getting bullied fights back, learns karate, and learns to fight back against his oppressors. Ralph Macchio was great as Daniel, but for me, what really made this movie was Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi. Great title, defining role of his career. One of the greatest acting performances of all time. Just a legendary character, and it being set in the 1980s didn't hurt it either. I think that made it more relatable. You got great 80s music in the movie. Just a great, simple storyline, but very effective. Just a great movie. While we're sticking with the year of 1984, we're going to talk about the movie Footloose, starring Kevin Bacon. Simple storyline, basically very relatable. Somebody trying to stand up for their right to freedom and expression, and freedom of speech, basically. But on a smaller scale, it's a town that has banned dancing and any kind of creative expression. Kevin Bacon plays the title character. You've also got Laurie Singer, Diane West, and John Lithgow. And of course, being set in the 1980s, you got classic 1980s music in this movie. Just a great storyline, great music. You got Never, Dancing in the Sheets, and of course the title song Footloose by Kenny Loggins. Just a great film. Next up is the 2001 hit film Shrek. Starring Mike Myers as Shrek. You got Eddie Murphy as Donkey, Cameron Diaz as the princess, and John Lithgow as the bad guy. Another one of those films that was game changing. It was quite unique. You've had a lot of fairy tale movies throughout the years, but this is one of those movies that kind of took the fairy tale and flipped it on its head. It was a revolutionary idea. It was very well done. And, it was one of those rare movies that can relate to, multiple age range and audience. They had humor and stuff for kids, or content for kids. They had humor and content for adults. They had some that was for both. A very, very funny movie. And just very well done. Great movie. Pardon me. Next up, we're going to be talking about the 1999 film The Green Mile, starring Tom Hanks as Paul Edgecombe. You got the late Michael Clark Duncan as Paul Coffey. James Cromwell is in this, as well as Graham Greene, Sam Rockwell, and Barry Pepper. And Harry Dean Stanton is in this as well. So for me, this movie, even though it's from the same director that does The Shawshank Redemption, and The Shawshank Redemption, don't get me wrong, is a fantastic film. But for me, Shawshank Redemption did not have the personal and emotional connection that this movie had. That was the only thing that was lacking, and why I didn't include Shawshank Redemption in my top 40. So The Green Mile, and it's Michael Clark Duncan's performance as the character Paul Coffey that really sets this film apart. It's a very emotional character. It's very relatable. You can feel his emotion and, feel the truth in his character. He's very relatable. Of course, Tom Hanks as Paul Edgecombe is just legendary. Just a great storyline, very unique storyline, but it works on so many levels. Great film. The next one up on the list is the 1993 film, The Sandlot. And again, this one might be a little bit of personal bias for me because this is one of my childhood favorite films. And all the characters in it, the actors did do a great job. But I think it's the fact that it's just a simple storyline that I think every little boy can relate to, or when they were a little boy can relate to. Maybe some girls can too. A simple storyline about boys in baseball. It just works on so many levels. And them having an adventure, but their connection is through baseball. And it's just a great family film. Highly recommend The Sandlot. Next up on the list is the 2009 hit film blockbuster Avatar. Another James Cameron directed film. Again, a game changer. It was just nothing really like it before. It was a unique storyline. I mean, you've had films about aliens, but the fact that this one was started on Earth, it's about Earthlings going to another planet and creating their version of the indigenous people that they can operate like a robot, but they're real life. They call them avatars. Just a unique storyline. You've got Sam Worthington as the title character. Stephen Lang's in this. You got Michelle Rodriguez. And of course, you had the legendary Sigourney Weaver. Just a great storyline, great action scenes. Just a great film. Next up, I've already done a film on this one, or video on this one, but it's got to be included in the 1985 film The Goonies. Again, just a very simple storyline, but just a classic movie. Being in the 80s works so well. A lot of famous actors that are very young in their career in this film. Just an overall great storyline, very humorous, good movie. Next up is another one I've done a video on, the 2012 film Rock of Ages. You got a lot of well-known actors in this: Tom Hanks, Russell Brand, Paul Giamatti, Julianne Hough, Alec Baldwin, and Diego Boneta. And basically, for me, like I said, what makes this movie great is just the music. And again, I'm a little biased towards 1980s rock music, but if you're any kind of fan of rock music, this is a great movie. Definitely recommend it. Next up is the just trying to see here. I believe it's 2019 film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. Basically, this film is Tom Hanks' portrayal of the late great Fred Rogers, the beloved children's entertainer and TV icon. And I really don't think anybody else but Tom Hanks could pull off this character. It is spot on how good he is as Fred Rogers. You really believe that it's not Tom Hanks up there. That's Fred Rogers. It's such a believable character. It's a beautiful storyline. It's heartfelt. It's genuine. And the music that they choose in this, that they put to the scenes, is very well done. Just a beautiful movie. And definitely, if you've never seen it, check it out. You'll be doing yourself a favor. Next up, we got a bit of a twofer here because they kind of relate to each other. So the 2011 film, The Avengers, and the 2019 film, Avengers Endgame. So we'll start out with the 2011 film, Avengers. Basically, out of all the superhero movies I could pick, I chose Avengers because it's really the first superhero film where you have a bunch of superheroes coming together as a group that were never as a group before until this movie. X-Men doesn't really count because they've always started off as a group. They didn't have origin films before the first X-Men movie and then brought them together. They were just together. Whereas this one, you had all the different origin films. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Chris Evans as Captain America, Mark Ruffalo as Hulk. Now, to be fair, he never really had a standalone film as Mark Ruffalo playing Hulk, but there were standalone Hulk films before this. Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, and Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. So basically, just for... this is such a big blockbuster when it came out. There was nothing like it. It was epic. Seeing all these heroes come together on one big movie. The action sequences are what you'd expect from a big budget blockbuster superhero movie. Just a great, great film. And then for me, the reason I also picked Avengers Endgame is it is the culmination of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All the individual storylines finally colliding and finishing in one movie. Even though Avengers Infinity War showed quite a few of the same characters in this one, not every single character was in this film the way, or were in that film the way they are in this film. It is insane the number of major actors that are all together in one film. It's got to be some kind of a record for most number of well-known A-list and B-list actors in one film. It's bananas. And then, of course, you got the quintessential final battle scene where every single one of the characters is in the scene after some of them were brought back after being, what they call the blip by Thanos, where he snaps his fingers with the Infinity Stones and gets rid of half the universe. And then once they, reverse that process and they all come back and they're all together for the final fight scene. And you got Captain America there standing with Thor's hammer in one hand, his shield in the other, and he looks up and he goes, "Avengers, assemble." And they're all assembled. It's just legendary. And that's why I believe this belongs in the top 40 movies of all time. Next up is a personal favorite of mine, but I honestly think this is one of the greatest movies ever made. It's one of the closest things to a perfect movie that I have ever watched. The only thing it's probably lacking is being a big blockbuster, big budget name movie and not having a heck of a lot of big known actors. But other than that, everything else is working for it. The storyline, the script, the acting that is in there is pretty damn good. In fact, I think it's more relatable than some big budget actors you could hire. The storyline is simple, it's effective, it's to the point, it's emotional, it's powerful, and the music in this is great. And you don't have to be religious to like this movie. It certainly helps because it's got a religious tone to it. But for me, deep down, it's about the brotherhood as policemen, family, but most of all, it's about taking responsibility and doing what you need to do to be a good father and a good husband to your family. It's just great. It's very emotional and very genuine, and you can really relate to this movie. Next up is the 1993 film, and this is Mrs. Doubtfire, starring the late Robin Williams and Sally Field. Even the kids, the actors that play their kids, do a great job. But for me, it's Robin Williams that makes this film. I don't picture any other actor that could pull this role off like Robin Williams does. It's a strange storyline. It's one of those ones, again, that probably really shouldn't work, but it does. It's such a great film, and I think it's very relatable in a way that, how many dads can say that, above breaking the law, that they would go something, do whatever they could to see their kids if they were given a similar situation. Um, so yeah, he basically, he loves his kids. He's a great dad, but he's estranged with his wife. He's not very connected. They end up getting a divorce, and he's not allowed to see his kids as much as he would like to. So he dresses up as a nanny to sneak in and be able to see his kids. So it's just a great storyline. It works on so many levels, and just a lovely film. Very funny with Robin Williams as Mrs. Doubtfire. Next up is the 2016 film Deadpool. Now, for me, this is a film. It's a stupid film, but it's stupid on purpose, and it's so stupid it really shouldn't work, but it does. It's one of the greatest stupid films of all time, if that makes any sense. Really, no other character or actor other than Ryan Reynolds could play Deadpool. It's just, he's the most useless, foul-mouthed, worst superhero of all time, but he is hysterical. He eventually gets the job done, no matter how bad of a job he does. This is one of those movies, no matter how many times I watch it, I'm left crying at some parts. I'm laughing so hard. It's just a great comedic film. Just everything about this film shouldn't work, and it does. It's just great. Love Deadpool. Next up is the oldest film on my list, the 1974 film Earthquake, starring some well-known actors of the time: Charlton Heston, Ava Gardner, George Kennedy, Lauren Green, Genevieve Bujold, and Richard Roundtree. The reason I picked this film is because a lot of the disaster films in this day and age, they rely heavily on CG or, just recreated effects, where this is a movie in a time where you didn't have that stuff available to you. It relied heavily on practical effects, which is amazing, whether it be on set location, or they built sets, or they built miniatures, whatever they did to make this movie work, it was phenomenal how well it was done using just practical effects. And, you really believe you're in the middle of a giant earthquake in Los Angeles in the 1970s. And it's really about these actors, their characters, surviving the earthquake and finding ways to get through it and get out of the situation. It's just a great disaster film, and love Earthquake. Next up is the 2004 film Miracle, starring Kurt Russell as the head coach Herb Brooks. And for me, I'm a little biased to sports. I love hockey. But for me, this is one of the greatest sports stories of all time. It's based on a true story. And that's why I believe this belongs in the top 40. It's based off the true story of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, who at Lake Placid defeated at the time, seemingly undefeatable, invincible Russian hockey team. And they were basically just a bunch of fresh-faced college kids. It's basically about this movie is about how they did that. And just really, the actors that play all the hockey players, really well done. Just a great movie about a great moment in sports history. Definitely think that should be in my top 40. Next up is the 2017 film Only the Brave, starring Josh Brolin, Miles Teller, Jeff Bridges, James Badge Dale, Taylor Kitsch, and Jennifer Connelly. Another one that's based on a true story. Firefighters, they're basically called hot shots. They put out like grass fires and whatnot. And basically, what it is really truly means to be an everyday American hero, to put your life on the line without even thinking about it and doing it for others. And it's basically the story of how they became they're called the Granite Mountain Hot Shots. It's basically the story of how they became these hot shots, their families at the time, and the tragic circumstance when 19 of the 20 of them perished in a fire. Really emotional movie. The music that they use in this movie works really well. There's some pretty humorous moments in it. Very genuine, just a great film. Definitely recommend Only the Brave, sorry. Next up is the 2006 film We Are Marshall, starring Matthew McConaughey and Matthew Fox as the two title coaches. Anthony Mackie is in this as well as Kate Mara. This film for me is based off the true story of the 1970 Thundering Herd plane crash, when the entire senior football team, their coaches, the staff, the boosters, parents, they all died in this tragic plane crash. It was one of the worst moments in sports history. uh, and basically how they, instead of sitting and mourning and feeling sorry for themselves, they rise from the ashes to grab glory. It's a really inspirational story about never giving up in seemingly overwhelming odds. Very emotional story, very genuine. Just really good acting, brings it twofold. Great film, We Are Marshall. Next up on the list is the 2004 film, I believe. 2004 film, A Day After Tomorrow, starring Dennis Quaid, Jake Gyllenhaal, Emmy Rossum, it's one of the greatest disaster films that I've seen. And of course, it uses more CG effects, but just an overall around like different disasters happening in one movie. It's really well done. It's a great storyline, but it's relatable too because the disasters are based on global warming, something that's a constant topic and discussion in real life. So, definitely a relatable film. Great disaster film. Next up is the 2016 film Patriots Day. Based off of the movie is based around the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. Stars Mark Wahlberg. He's kind of a compilation of a few different real life characters created and molded into one. You've also got Kevin Bacon is in this, John Goodman, J.K. Simmons, and Michelle Monaghan. And it was a really tragic thing that happened with the Boston Marathon bombing. But this really is about the story of good versus evil, to simplify it. The good guys being the cops and the FBI and the paramedics and all the first responders that were there on that day, and also the ones that tracked down these guys that committed the bombing and helped bring them to justice. There's some genuinely funny moments in this. It's very relatable. And it helped. There's some uplifting moments as well. Instead of being brought down by these terroristic acts, the people of Boston banded together and created the slogan "Boston Strong." It's very inspirational how they rallied around such a devastating event, and brought these guys to justice. So, great film. Next up on the list is the 2008 film The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke. This one here is a movie again that you really wouldn't think would be such as good a movie as it is, but I think what's relatable with it is that any major athlete or anybody who's done a career that you really have to be in good shape for, physical aspect, and you get past, you're in in the end of your career or you're in retirement, you want to relive those glory days, but you can't. You can understand where this guy is coming from. Mickey Rourke plays the title character, Randy the Ram Robinson, who in the 1980s is a major hit wrestler in what would be their WWF kind of thing. But as time goes on, he falls out of favor. He gets old and doesn't, kind of falls to the wayside doing odd jobs to make money. He still wrestles, but he's not in the glory and the limelight like he used to. And basically, it's at one point, because he's using steroids and, overdoing it with his body, he ends up having a heart attack. And the doctors basically tell him, you can't wrestle anymore.